Paradoxical, this series, hasn't it been great? It's been awesome. Pastor Keith has done a great. Let's give Pastor Keith a round of applause. He is such a great pastor, a great leader, great communicator. We are lucky. We are lucky to have a man like him pastoring over us. So thanks again, Pastor Keith. My name is Jared Cruz. I'm here. I serve. I love this church. I do lots of stuff, so you can just call me the lots of stuff guy. That's fine. But I want to welcome those that are joining us online. Thanks for joining us. We are wrapping up our series called Paradoxical. And it's an interesting concept, the word paradox. And what is that? In English, it literally means just self-contradictory. And so today I thought, hey, I'm going to give you a story to kind of illustrate what a paradox actually is. A parrot snatches a young woman's hat while out on an evening stroll. She begins to plead with the parrot to return the hat before he flies away with it, to which he replies, I will only return the hat if you can guess correctly whether or not I indeed intend to return the hat. This is why I hate birds and I don't like parrots. So the woman begins to ponder. There's no paradoxical problem if the woman guesses that the parrot will return the hat. If she's right and then he returns the hat. If she's wrong, the parrot keeps it. You tracking with me? Pretty easy. If, however, she answers that the parrot will not return the hat, we end up with a paradox. If she's right in that the parrot will not return the hat, and the parrot never intended to do so, then the parrot has to return the hat, but in doing so, he breaks his word and contradicts the woman's answer. On the other hand, if she's wrong and the parrot actually did intend to return the hat, the parrot must then keep it even though he intended not to do so, thereby also breaking his word. Did you get all that? Aren't paradoxes fun? They're so easy to understand. That wasn't really good. I'm going to bring a guy up here who's going to help us understand paradoxes a little bit better. Good thing we're talking about paradoxical statements, not time paradoxes, or we'd be in trouble. If you haven't seen Back to the Future or any of those movies, first slap yourself and then go rent it on Netflix because you got to see those movies, right? So we've been talking about paradoxical statements, and one person defined a paradoxical statement like this, and I love it because I feel like it narrows in exactly what we've been talking about. A paradoxical statement is a statement that grabs our attention due to its apparent contradiction, but then it motivates us to resolve that contradiction through deeper thought and reflection. And I think that's what we've been doing. I think that's what this series has been like, right? Because we've been journeying through this series, and we actually see that Jesus has made some of these paradoxical statements throughout the Gospels. The first week that we started this series, we had Shavian come here. He spoke about finding real life, and Jesus said, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. The next week we talked about the greater blessing. It's more blessed to give than receive. That's a paradox in today's society. It's all about what I can get. What can I get? How can I be better? And Jesus says, no. It's more blessed to give than it is to receive. And then we talked about finishing last. So the last will be first and the first will be last. And then Pastor Keith did an awesome job last week talking about what it would be like to become like a child. And he says, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So there were times when Jesus used paradoxical statements. And I think there's a few reasons that he did that. There's probably more, but I'm going to highlight a couple. So this is the first one in your notes. I believe one of the reasons Jesus used paradoxical statements is because he wants us to go deeper. I think Jesus really wants us to go deeper. There are times when simplicity is key. God, I need simplicity so many times, right? But there are also times when God wants to stretch us. And there are times when Jesus was standing in front of people, his disciples, the crowds, the Pharisees, and he wanted them to reflect. He wanted them to think. He wanted them to go deeper. Because that's when growth happens. That's really when the growth happens. I was in student ministries for 10 years, and I love teenagers. They're awesome. And one of the coolest things for me is when I was in student ministry is when students would start asking questions. Because when they started asking questions, they got it, right? They were thinking through the stuff. They were starting to apply these things in their life. And like, Jared, that's cool, but what about this? Or what did God say about this? Or you know what? The sad ones were, but my parents say this, and God says this, so what do I do? But the great thing is that they were going through that process. They were thinking, and I knew that at that moment they were growing. They were growing. And so that's why I think the first reason that Jesus uses paradoxical statements is he wants us to go deeper so we'll grow. So this week we're going to look at a paradoxical statement, and it's going to be the last one. We're going to wrap up with this one. And just to give you a little background, Jesus is speaking to his disciples and also the crowds around him. See, that's the thing about Jesus is that anywhere he went, he always drew a crowd. And we're going to talk about that too. But he makes this awesome paradoxical statement in Matthew 23, verse 11. He says this, "But the greatest among you will be your servant. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be raised to honor." Now, I don't know about you, but today, for me, that doesn't seem very paradoxical to me. It doesn't. In fact, some ways, it kind of makes sense to me, actually, more than normal. You see, the word that's used here, the word servant used here, the Greek word used here is the word diakonos, okay? And if you grew up in the church or you kind of know the history of the church, there's a position held in many churches called a deacon, right? And the whole point of the diaconate ministry is that of service, right? They're intended to be set up to serve people, to help them, to pray for them, to visit them in the hospital, to help them move. Whatever it is, we are here to serve. That's what a deacon is. And we get this word deacon from the Greek word diakonos, which means to serve. So when we read this, I don't know about you, but I don't think twice when I read this. In fact, for me, when I read this, it actually has more positive connotations than negative to me, right? Because when we think of a servant today, we appreciate servants. We're like, man, these men and women, they serve, they give their time. In fact, it's honorable. I respect those that serve. But if you knew Jesus' culture, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. If you were living in Jesus' day and you heard this statement, it didn't work. In fact, this was a very problematic statement. Because here's the deal. No one in their right mind in Jesus' day would ever put the word servant and great together. They never would. Culturally, it didn't work. It didn't go together. Because if you were a servant, literally was one of the lowest positions held in society. It was literally one of the lowest. In fact, most servants were just called slaves. That's what they were. They were slaves. The only position maybe lower than that of a servant in Jesus' day might have been a beggar, a crippled, homeless person on the street, right? That was really it. If you were a servant, you were at the bottom. And so it wasn't exactly a noteworthy or popular title, if you understand what I'm saying. It wasn't looked upon highly, and it certainly wasn't looked upon as great. But Jesus paradoxically starts throwing out this word servant, and he equates it with great. A statement that wasn't normal, a statement that was out of place, a statement that wasn't accepted, it just didn't work. This statement just didn't work, but Jesus was going for something more. Jesus was going for something more. I think the next reason that I think Jesus used paradoxes, and I put paradoxical statements, and I put this in your notes as well. I believe there were times in his ministry when he was with his disciples and he's walking with these people. There were times that he wanted to stop his audience. Just stop them like dead in their tracks. Like, wait, that doesn't make sense. You got to back up Jesus and repeat that because that doesn't work. I believe there were times when Jesus wanted to challenge people's presuppositions. I believe there are times when he wanted to reconfigure their attitudes and rearrange their perceptions. To take the focus off the flesh and direct it toward the Spirit. I think Jesus' paradoxical statements force us to reroute our attention from the flesh to the Spirit. And so my question for you this morning is, does Jesus want your attention? Does Jesus need to stop you this morning? Does he need to reconfigure your attitude and rearrange your perceptions? Does Jesus need to stop you in your life? Maybe you're in a season right now and it might be going really good and God's saying, whoa, you need to stop for a second. You need to stop for a second. Does Jesus need to stop you? Jesus wanted to stop his audience when he said, the greatest among you will be your servant. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be raised to honor. So what does this mean? What does this mean? What's Jesus talking about here? What is he trying to get at here? Because for you and me, that kind of makes sense. We got to remember it didn't make sense to them. So what was he getting at? Okay, what was he trying to say? As I begin to read through this text, one of the things that Jesus' statement did is made me stop. I had to stop and go, okay, what is this? And it forced me to have to kind of dig deeper and think deeper and reflect deeper and go back to the context. What was he saying? Who was he saying it to? When did he say it? Why did he say it? It forced me to do that, and we're going to do that here in a second because it's going to give us, I think, some honest reinforcement of what's going on here. And so Jesus, in this moment when he says this paradoxical statement, he's with his disciples, he's with the crowds around him, he's potentially, possibly with some Pharisees. We'll talk about that in a second. But in all accounts of this passage, this is actually recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's not recorded in John, but it's recorded in 3 different Gospels. And in every one of those Gospels, this statement, this moment, was actually preceded a pretty intense conversation between Jesus and the Pharisees. It was pretty intense. And so just to let you know, just a little background, if you didn't grow up in the church, you don't know what the heck's a Pharisee. A Pharisee, okay, they were a group of people that were the religious leaders of the day. Like, they were the top dogs. I mean, they were looked upon as the guys who knew it all. They were the spiritual leaders. They had it going on, and people looked to them for things. We're going to talk about that. And they worked incredibly hard, the Bible says. They worked incredibly, incredibly hard at keeping the law. The Pharisees worked to keep the law, okay? And it wasn't just, I'm not talking about the governmental law, like, not paying your taxes, not stealing. That wasn't what they're talking about. The Pharisees worked incredibly hard at keeping the spiritual law, the Mosaic law. Okay, and so when we hear the word law today in churches, it has a really negative connotation to us. It really does. And what you got to understand about the law is it wasn't always like that. Okay, the law literally was designed early on. God gave the law to the Israelites to, number 1, protect them. Number 2, to help guide them. Okay, and so it was a very, very good thing for the Israelites. But underneath all of that, there was a deeper purpose behind the law. And that was to show the people their need for a Savior. Because here's what the law was. The law was this gigantic list, literally, not just the 10 Commandments, chapters and chapters in the Bible were the law, all these things that said, this is what you got to do if you want to be like me. This is what you got to do if you want to get to heaven. This is what you got to do. All these things, and you look at this and you go, there's no way. There's absolutely no way I can do that. I'm not perfect. And God goes, bingo. The law was designed to show you there's no possible way you can hit all these things. You can try, but you're not going to get it. That's why you need a Savior. That's why you need my Son. And so Jesus came on the scene and abolished all that, and he became the new covenant, right? But that was the purpose behind the law. And so the Pharisees kept this law. They kept this law. It was like a religious checklist. And just to give you a perspective on how they did this, okay? Imagine you buy a cabin in the woods, okay? Brand new cabin, it's beautiful. You got this bay window that you put out your couch, and out this window is this phenomenal, spectacular view, this mountain peak and the snow and the trees. You see animals, and you just sit in that thing on vacation, and you just sit in awe of what God created, okay? But after a while, you know what ends up happening to that window? It starts to get dirty a little bit. Animals kind of mess on it a little bit, so you're cleaning it, scrubbing it. You don't want to just, stop that view, so you're cleaning and scrubbing it. Okay, you're good. Then a storm comes, and the window starts to get dirty again, so you're like, oh, man, I got to get this. And you start cleaning this window. And then you have family members, and all the kids are putting their greasy little hands on, and you're just so frustrated that you're like, I got to get this window clean. You're obsessed with cleaning the window that you forget what the window's for. You forget to remember, like, oh yeah, the window's not just for the window, it's for the view. And the Pharisees looked at the law, and they became so obsessed with keeping it, they forgot who was behind it. They forgot the awe and the wonder of the God that created them. It says it's not about what you do. It's about how much I love you and want you to follow me. And that's what it was like. So you got to understand that's the perspective here, because it's going to matter when we talk about this in a bit. But the Pharisees kept the law as though their salvation depended on it. And the problem is that they expected the same thing from everyone else. So Jesus has this interaction with the Pharisees that brings us up to this point. And the Bible says this interaction was so intense that it literally left the Pharisees speechless, it says. They were asking, because oftentimes the Pharisees would try to pin Jesus down and try to pin him with a question that would incriminate him so they could kill him or something like that. And he always had a solid answer, right? And this one was so solid, the Bible said it actually left them speechless. And so this is what it says. I'm going to read this real quick. Matthew 23, let's jump up to verse 1. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and his disciples, saying this, "The scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in Moses' chair of authority as teachers of the law. So practice and observe everything they tell you, but do not do as they do. For they preach things, but they don't practice them. The scribes and the Pharisees tie up heavy loads that are hard to bear and place them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not lift a finger to make them lighter. They do all their deeds to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries, by the way, those are just these prayer boxes that they would wear with scripture verses, but they ended up using them as statements of spiritual authority is what it said. So they made their phylacteries wide and more conspicuous and made their tassels long. Verse 6 says, they love the place of distinction and honor at the feast and the best seats in the synagogues, those on the platform near the scrolls of the law facing the congregation, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and public forums, and to have people call them rabbi. And then it jumps down to verse 11. He says, but the greatest among you will be your servant. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be raised to honor. And so Jesus is making a very stark contrast here. He's calling out a group of people that have done a really, really good job of making themselves great. The Pharisees, literally, they built themselves up into a tower of superiority and power. And they used the law and religious motivation to elevate themselves to the highest rank. And the thing is, the people looked to the Pharisees, okay? This is what they did. They looked to them to teach them, to instruct them, to spiritually guide them, to give them direction. And probably one of the most important things the people looked to for the Pharisees was to identify and confirm the one who would come and break the oppression of the Roman government. You know what I'm talking about? To look to confirm that person that would come, the Messiah. Now we know that Jesus came not to set up an earthly kingdom, but a heavenly kingdom. We know that. But this was their standard of greatness, and this is the point. The Pharisees were the level, that was their standard of greatness. But Jesus steps on the scene, and he begins to start his ministry, and he lives life upside down. He lives life upside down. You say, well, how? Jesus came on the scene, and he started flipping religion upside down, the law upside down. You remember the time when Jesus was with his disciples, and they're eating, and the Pharisees catch him eating? And your Pharisees didn't wash your hands. That's against the law. That's unclean. It's in the law that you would wash your hands before you eat. How can you call yourself a rabbi and not teach your disciples how to wash their hands? You remember what Jesus' response was? It's not what goes in your mouth that makes you unclean. It's what comes out. It's what comes out, and that's from the heart. And what do the Pharisees do? They could never answer. Jesus was so classic. Everything he said, they were just like, man, oh yeah, But it just fueled their fire, made them more angry and more angry because Jesus lived life upside down. He went against the norm. He swam against the current. You could call Jesus a holy rebel. You could. That's what he was. I'm not saying he'd be a rebel, but that's who Jesus was, because culturally, if you were the Pharisees, man, this guy is. He says like he knows the law and the prophets. Man, he's not living it. And Jesus said, no. You don't understand. It's not about Moses. It's not about the law. It's about me. And so he brings this message of grace. This was new, okay? He brings this message of grace and love and relationship. And you know what it did? It absolutely captivated people. It absolutely captivated people because they were tired. They were tired of trying to live up to a standard that they couldn't keep. They were tired of trying to carry a yoke they couldn't bear. That's why Jesus said, take my yoke on your back. It's easy, it's light. That's why he said, all who are weary and burdened, come to me. I will give you rest. Not necessarily physical rest, although it might have been, because doing those tasks could probably be exhausting. But he said, I will give you rest from the religious demands. Here's a brain, this is a, news flash. Jesus didn't come to start a religion.
That's right.
He came on the scene and he said, come follow me. Come follow me. Come do life with me. Walk alongside me. Let me lift you up when you fall. Let me love on you like you're supposed to be loved, the way I created you to be loved. Let me show you how to love other people because of the love I've shown you. That's why Jesus stepped on the scene. And he said, I'm going to give you rest from all that other stuff. And so the message of grace broke through. And even though the people, even though they didn't grow up maybe learning this or understanding this, in some strange way, it just started to make sense. That like they got it and they embraced it, and it absolutely changed their lives. You know the cool thing? That same Jesus that offered that same grace offers the same thing for you and me today, right now. It will absolutely change your life. So Jesus is standing in front of these people, and he's exposing an attitude of superiority and self-righteousness. And he's asking them this question. He says, is this what greatness is to you? Is this how you measure greatness? Not practicing what you preach? Cursing people with unbearable religious demands and not lifting a finger to ease the burden? Is this what greatness is? An empty heart or an empty heart with a religious facade? Expecting to be served without ever paying the favor back? He says, is this what greatness is to you? And Jesus goes, no. The greatest is your servant. The last thing in your notes, I think, no, it's not the last, but it's close to the last. I think the reason that Jesus used this paradoxical statement at this time with this people and that crowd, I really think he wanted to expose a selfish tendency and replace it with a godly character. He wanted to take a selfish tendency, selfishness of self-righteousness, and replace it with a godly characteristic called humility and service. And he wanted people to see that because you got to understand, these people were looking at the Pharisees like this, and you got to understand, guys, it's not about that. It's actually about this down here. So what does this have to do with you and me? It's a great question. Every time I read the Bible, I say, so what? Because it's good to learn the history, it's good to learn what's going on, but so what? I believe the Bible was not just written for generations past. It wasn't just for your granny, okay? The Bible was written right here for us today in this room right now. And it has real life implications and real life applications, and it's full of that. It's dripping with that. And I think it's full of that application for days like today. And so here's the question. I think here's the question Jesus would ask you and me right now. If he was sitting right here on the stage, this is the question he would ask. He would say, what is greatness to you? What's greatness to you? Because you know what? We gravitate. We absolutely, all of us, it's in our DNA. We absolutely gravitate toward greatness. We aspire to be great. We love great people. We love to watch great people. It's like I love to watch LeBron James and Ricky Fowler, okay, even though he's not playing that well. We love great people. We just love greatness. It's part of who we are, but the bad thing about that sometimes is that sometimes we'll do whatever it takes to get there. Sometimes we'll do whatever it takes to be great. And if our standard of greatness is here when it really needs to be here, that's a problem. How do you measure greatness, Jesus would say? Is it worldly success? Is it money? Is it a college degree? Is it a job title? Is it skills you have? Is it accolades that you've been given? Is it fame? Is it the people you know? Is it the car you drive, the house you live? The list goes on. What is greatness? I think this is where it gets real. Because I think that if Jesus was literally right here, sitting right down next to me right now, and we flipped the tables on him and said, Jesus, what is greatness to you? In this audience today, in this room right now, Jesus, what is greatness to you? This is what I think he'd say. Greatness is hurting with people that are hurting. Greatness is crying with people that are crying. It's laughing with people that are laughing. It's encouraging people that need to be encouraged. It's loving people that need to be loved. It's serving people who need to be served. It's not stepping over someone to elevate you. It's stepping beneath someone to elevate them. Greatness is lending a hand. It's visiting someone in the hospital. It's buying groceries for somebody that's in need. It's paying for a tank of gas. It's shoveling a driveway. It's dropping off a meal. It's meeting a need. It's praying for a need. Greatness is living life upside down. And I put that in your notes, not because it's the title of the message, but it's living life upside down. I think Jesus would sum up greatness in one word. Greatness is humility. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Because that's what we're talking about here. Jesus was literally subtracting out a selfish tendency and throwing in a word called humility. A godly character called service and humility. Here's the deal. You cannot serve someone if you're not humble. You can't. Because what it makes you do, I have to go beneath them, even though I don't want to go beneath them. I have to go beneath them to serve them. It's impossible to serve someone if you're not humble. If you're arrogant and prideful, you're not going to be serving anybody. And that's what Jesus was talking about. Jesus said, that's literally what he said. That's what he means. Greatness is humility. And here's the thing, church, 3D community. Greatness isn't hard. It's just seldomly found. It's seldomly found. So my question for you this morning, before we wrap something else up here, my question is, will you be great? Will you be great? Men, will you be great at home? Jared, will you be great at home? Men, will you be great at serving your wife? Men, will you be great at serving your kids? Going beneath them and sacrificing maybe something you want to do to make them better. Ladies, will you be great at home? Will you support your husbands and love your husbands and nurture your kids? Ladies, will you be great at home? Will you be great at work? Those moments when you're like, your pride's kicking in, and it's like, you know what? Will you be great at work? Will you step beneath that one person that drives you crazy? And I'm talking to myself right now, okay? Would you beneath yourself to elevate them? Will you be great at work? Will you be great at the line at Starbucks? I don't know, right? Will you be great? Will you be great at 3D Church? By the way, that's a plug for children's ministry. I'm just kidding. Jesus is calling you and me to greatness today. And he did everything it took. He finished the work that it took to make us great. And you know what? Sometimes it goes unnoticed. It's a thankless job, greatness, sometimes. Because true greatness is not always what people love, but true greatness is always what people need. Always, without a doubt. Greatness is living life upside down. I'm going to ask the band to come up this morning. As they're coming up, there's one more thing that I was going back and forth with this week. And I just didn't know if I should do this or not. But I just felt like God was really pressing this in my heart from the very beginning. I told Pastor Keith a lot of times when I prepare a message, I always try to start with the end in mind. And what do I want people to know, think, and feel when they leave this place? And usually then I work down, right? I get the idea and I work down. Well, this time God said here and then ended me here. And then I had to fill up the middle. I told Keith it was like the divine jelly of the sandwich. But there's one more thing I want to do, and then I'm going to stop yakking my head off. Almost every single translation that I read this verse in, okay, and I read this verse probably 65 times the last couple of weeks, okay? Almost every single translation translate it like this: the greatest among you will be your servant. Your servant. Only a couple, 2, 3 max, that actually said the greatest among you will be a servant. Now, there's no difference. It doesn't mean anything different. It's not saying a different thing. It's the exact same thing. But for me, the word your stood out. I don't know why. It just did. The word your stood out to me today. So I just kept reading
different translations and find out which one said a, which one said your. The greatest will be your servant. And so if the Bible is just as applicable, and I believe it is, just as applicable today as it was back then there's some great people in this room right now. There are some great people in this room. There are great people that are serving right now. There are great people that are, you don't see them very often. They're back there, and they're working with your children, and they're talking about Jesus to your kids. My son accepted Christ about 3 weeks ago. And, we talk about Jesus and we talk about faith in our home, but if it wasn't for what Carolyn and these children workers are doing, it wouldn't be the same. I might not have had that conversation before golf practice on Sunday after church. When Carson says, Daddy, I just want to accept Jesus. It's the reason he came to me last week and he said, I want to be baptized. I'm like, do you even know what that is? He's like, no. That's okay, we'll work with that. But my point is this. There are great people in this church. You're great people. And there are great people that are serving our kids. There are great people that are getting up early every single week and trying to make this place look like a church as best as we can. It's a school, if you didn't notice, okay? But they're working every week, getting up early and setting this place up. There are people that are getting up every morning and going outside and setting up signs before church. There are people that are dragging trailers into this church so that we have all this stuff. This is all packed away. We can't keep this here. This all gets taken and they set up and tear down every single week, and there are great people who are doing that. There are great people who are running sound back there. Sarah and Kelsey, thank you guys. There are great people right now that are leading us in the presence of God. Thank you guys. Like, what would we do without these guys, right? There are great people that are leading life groups right now, that are doing life with you and connecting with Jesus with you like this week, right? There are great people that are in charge of first impressions. It's important to them that when people comes in, they feel welcome and like this is home, right? There are great people doing that stuff. There are great people that are praying behind the scenes. You guys are so awesome. I told you this is going to be emotional. If I could just talk through it. This couple, Trig and Bev Joe, every week, you don't see this. They don't even want to be seen for it. They would never want to be seen for it. None of these people would. They touch every chair. They touch every chair. And they pray for the person who will come sit in that. That's you guys. That's someone who hasn't been here yet. And they touch every single chair. A quick story. This morning this happened, and it caught Keith and it caught me. Every morning we set things up in here, right? We try to make this a little more homey. And we're behind a little today. We're low on people serving. It's just one of those days. That's okay. We were setting up these these seat covers back here. And we only had a few people doing it. And this band right here, they were wrapping up what they were doing. And I'm kind of setting this up. And before I know, not a single one of them was left here. All of them were up here. All of them serving and helping. And they weren't asked to do it. They just did it. And they were just there. They could have been jabbing and talking and like me right now up here and wasting time, but they weren't. They came up there and they helped. And there are so many people that do this week in and week out. And so this is what I want to do, and I'm going to shut up. If you serve here today, at any capacity, whether it was today or another week, will you just stand? Just if you serve here at all in any capacity, please stand. Please stand. Stay seated or stay stood up. You're not just getting a round of applause by these people, and it's important that they are because they love you, but you're getting a round of applause in heaven right now because of what you're doing. You're changing lives, every one of you. And there's more room for that, isn't it? Amen? There's more room for that. The great thing about these people, stay stood up and I'm done. The great thing about these people, right? The great thing is they would never, ever, ever, ever call themselves great. because they live life upside down. They live life upside down, and they live out the word humility. Let's worship.